Uh,
Hello, and welcome to a special Albert Schenker Institute webinar on out of school time programming. This is a topic that is meaningful to students, their families, and educators because we know partnerships in education help students thrive. With us today is an incredible expert on out of school time programming who we have been pleased to have as a fellow at the Albert Schenker Institute. Jordan Beal is a graduate of the Georgetown University Education Transformation Master's Degree Program with an emphasis on policy and advocacy. Jordan, welcome and thank you so much for sharing your expertise today.
of course, thank you for having me. So I'm just gonna pull up my slides. And so today I'm going to be talking about um, ways that we can help caregivers make informed decisions on what programs they send their children to related to before and after school programming, as well as ways that we can equip practitioners to evaluate their program to ensure that they're creating and sustaining high quality after school programs. In this presentation, I will be going over what inspired this project, my literature review findings on what makes high quality after school program. Then I will share my guidebook that I created specifically for parents and practitioners, go over how the guide can be used, and end with Q&As that parents have sent in. So this project was largely inspired by research that came out from the pandemic. Research since the pandemic has really exploded on how out of school time benefits students in a variety of ways, specifically looking at academic, social, and behavioral benefits. And as someone who has worked in these after school programs pre and post pandemic, I've seen firsthand how real these benefits are for students, their families, and even their larger community. However, I've also seen the less glamorous side from working in these places. And that specifically really kind of looks like these false assumptions. And the false assumptions that we see often as practitioners is that well, people think that programs are uniform across the board. They think that program quality will be high regardless of where they're sending their students. And it's important that we challenge this idea because after school programs are not uniform and sufficient. And this isn't just upsetting to parents and students when they find this out, but it also, research shows us that program benefits are only present when the quality of programming is high. So I set out to understand what makes high quality after school programming. And early on in my literature review, I found that while researchers know that program quality needs to be high in order for the benefits to be seen, they have not yet established set standards for what make high quality programming. And the reason for this is because program quality should be largely context specific and be based on students and their specific needs. And while I understand what researchers are saying here and fully agree, as someone who has worked in putting on these types of programs, it can be really helpful to have a guide to hold us accountable to of what high quality programming looks like. And additionally, for parents, it can be helpful to know what to look for when you are looking at programs on where you want to send your children. So, with all this in mind, I reframe my question to understand what are the overarching tenets that make high quality out of school time programming. And this led me to find four overarching tenets. And I will be briefly going over these tenets, but for more information, you can read my literature review by looking at the link at the bottom of this slide or by going to the Albert Schenker blog. And so the first overarching tenet that we want to prioritize is having a whole child based design. A whole child based design recognizes the interconnectedness of students' needs and how these needs impact their development. Oftentimes, programs can be specific to one thing, such as homework help, but it's important to recognize that students have a variety of needs, whether they be academic, social, emotional, cognitive, and physical. And so after school programs should work to meet all of these needs and really serve the students and the places that they are in. Second, we really want to prioritize student engagement, reflecting on how meaningfully involved our students are in the program, because that involvement and that engagement is directly correlated with the benefits that students gain. Third, and I think almost most importantly, is really investing and focusing on having high quality staff members. While it can seem very simplistic, staff members could not be more important as they are really the backbone for setting up high quality programming. This is because the characteristics that staff members bring in directly influence the whole production, essentially. They influence the relationships students have with each other, the relationships students have with adults, the program climate, and the way that these activities are run. And last but not least is having a strong administration. Administrators often do the behind the scenes work that we can take for granted, but they have two primary tasks, those being making sure that implementation of programming is strong and that funding is steady. We can have all of the lofty goals that we want for our programming as practitioners, but without focusing on implementation, they're just kind of ideas that float around. And so making sure that the design features are actualized in programming is a critical challenge for practitioners that they should be aware of. Inconsistent funding, again, that can really serve as a major hindrance to having resources available to students and other additional add-ons that can be really beneficial, such as snacks and sunscreen and materials for activities. It's important to caveat here that you do not need a large budget to have a high quality program, you just need a consistent budget. So budget should align and meet programming goals and objectives. And then after conducting this literature review, I thought this is a really great read, but I'd like to see it in more of a resource form because sometimes we need a little bit of contextualization to really see where we want to go, which led me to creating my guidebook. And this guidebook really focuses on helping people understand California's expanded learning opportunity programs, also known as ELOP, and is centered around making sure that caregivers have informed knowledge on the kind of programs they want to send their children to, as well as equipping practitioners with a way to evaluate their programs to make sure that they are creating and sustaining these high quality opportunities. I decided to center my guidebook around ELOP because it helps contextualize and identify what we're looking for when we say high quality programming. And it also offers a really robust, strong, positive example of what before and after school programming should look like because of how expansive it is. Under the table of contents, you'll see that there are quite a few sections, and most of them are ELOP focused, such as frequently asked questions, what ELOP offers, how it stands up to quality standards, how caregivers can use it, and ways that people can advocate and stay informed on it. And if you're a California resident, I highly recommend reviewing the guidebook in its full because there's a lot of really great information on there that I've taken from the California websites, which can be very hard to use if you've ever been on a government website. But for the purpose of today, I will just be focusing on how ELOP stands up to high quality standards because this is the part of the guide that parents from anywhere can use and similarly practitioners anywhere can use it. So this part of the guide is seen here, and it's made up primarily of evaluation tables. There's a table for each of the 4 tenets of high quality after school programming, which again are the whole child based design, prioritizing student engagement, having high quality staff members, and a strong administration. But for this video, I'm just going to be going over one to show you how it can be used. And so here we have a blown up version of the whole child based design evaluation table. And if we look at the left side of the table here, we can see the characteristics. And for whole child based design, there are 3 primary characteristics that we are looking at. And these characteristics came straight from the literature review and offer key overarching research based qualities that we should be seeing within these categories. Next to that is a box asking if these characteristics are being met. And this is way more simple than a yes or no box. We really want to be critical when we're thinking about if these are being met. And parents can particularly use this column of the guide by touring programs, seeing what advertising or informational material programs offer, as well as directly asking these questions that are posed in the characteristic box. This part is primarily targeted for parents just to see if what we want to see is being offered in programming. And then the last part of the evaluation table is the evidence section. And this evidence box is where supporting policy and practices are required to demonstrate if the characteristic is being met or not. This evidence box is particularly important for practitioners and staff members because it holds us accountable to ensure that we have policies and systems in place to support what we want to see. It also helps establish consistency. Sometimes we'll have staff members that are really good at showing off one characteristic and others that are really great at doing another, but they're not doing both. And so when we know exactly what we're looking for, we're able to establish that consistency among staff members and programming. And so while these tables are focused on ELAP, like I said, they can be used anywhere. These questions that ask, does ELAP prioritize XYZ? We can easily swap out ELAP with another program name. And the evidence as well. If you're a practitioner, you can be inspired by this. You can look up the education codes that ELAP refers to here. You can also look at their resources and either mimic those to supplement what you have or be inspired by them. And with that, we will now be moving on to the question and answer section.
Thanks so much, Jordan. It's been a real pleasure to work with you as the Schenker Institute, as you have been creating the sort of guides that help us all better understand how to advocate for and understand what high quality out of school time programming looks like and what we should be asking for. With that, I know as you've been doing this work and sharing it with the Schenker Institute, questions have come in, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to have this conversation with you. So let's just go through these questions so you can react based on what you've learned and what you've experienced. Um, let's start with the very first one. And one of the questions coming in was, can I assume that my local after-school program that is linked with my student's school is good? And I am assuming this question is by virtue of just it being linked to my student's school.
Yes.
What is that link between out of school time programming provided by a school versus perhaps by a community education program or another nonprofit or another organization in a community?
Yeah, so it's very common to see schools either partner with outside organizations that have after school programs on their site or for schools to offer something of their own. Typically, when we have outside organizations come in, there is some approval process that the school has done. And this is kind of a pre-vetting process that we can sometimes rely on, but a really important caveat here is even when we say that we have these high quality standards, we want to follow up with them because it's one thing to say that we have them and another to implement them, which again goes back to that implementation stage of are we doing what we say we're doing and seeing that come to fruition. So while it does add an extra sense of security that the school has supported this program, I do think parents should investigate a little bit further, see their materials, maybe tour the site, just to make sure that program quality is high as they say it is.
That's really, really helpful, I think. And one of the things your research has done is it's helped create an opportunity for parents to be these these advocates for their children in more ways than one. I think parents are and family members are natural advocates for their children, just like teachers are natural advocates for their students. And what you've done is you have created an opportunity for people to see what the research says in really parent, family, teacher, advocate friendly language to be able to take to their out of school time program and investigate it. And that leads to this next question, which I think is an important one. So once you've done that investigation, what do I do if I assess a program for my child and it does not meet these high quality characteristics you've identified? But it might be all the only out of school time programming, that only third space that we have access to.
Yes, so this is unfortunately way more common than I would like it to be, and I'm sure many other people would like it to be. And the biggest thing we can do is advocate. Advocacy, a lot of the times, is thought of as this big grand gesture, and I really want to kind of smash that idea down because advocacy can be small little works. It can look like talking to people at the school who are in charge of after school programming if it's on a school site. It can look like talking to staff members, management who operate it. It can really take so many forms. It can just be like asking those questions and sparking the light because maybe these practitioners weren't aware of this and they hadn't thought of it. It shouldn't be a conversation that parents are scared to have and scared to look into. And when we advocate for our students, we are not only helping them and our family, but our larger community. So your brave voice can also really spark other brave voices to come in.
That's such great advice. Again, I think like any conflict or any problem we're trying to address, see if you can solve it at the lowest level of tension first.
Yeah.
It might simply be a conversation, and um, maybe parents don't think they might be the most knowledgeable person, but really your research and your guidebook really help um, put something in parents' hands that can really make them incredibly knowledgeable about what the evidence says about out of school time programming and what they should be looking for. Um, I think one of the things once we all become better educated on these third spaces, we do worry about students who are in low quality programs or programs that are struggling to maintain this quality. And what would you say are some of those risks? This next question, what do we risk when we put students in a low quality or a struggling out of school time program versus not having one at all?
Yes, this is a very complicated question because it primarily comes down to safety. And so we know that when students are in after school programs, they are safer than they would be if they are alone because youth violence and victimization peaks during that after school to dinner time, that 3 to 6 p.m. window. So having them in some sort of place that we know is safe, they are being watched over, that not only adds a lot of self-confidence to us as parents of knowing that our children are safe, but also we're really combating those violence and victimization rates. And I would think of the risk in terms of the cliche of like, you are the company you keep. So is this, oh, I just don't really know if I like the environment. It's not the greatest to me, but it's what's available. Or is it a question of, does this site have a history of potentially like letting kids wander? Things like that. I would look at it on a scale because sometimes maybe the engagement levels are low, but our students would be safer there than if they were alone. And those are risks that we have to ask ourselves as parents.
That is helpful. And it goes into this next question because I hear the safety being this number one priority, but you really outlined a number of elements that make a high quality program. So if I'm a parent who has to choose between two programs, am I supposed to prioritize safety, or is there a ranking of those high quality elements that you've studied?
Yes. So ultimately, safety should be what comes first. We don't want to put children in anything that could be harmful for them physically or mentally. We know that that is so much more dangerous than any of these other things. But what I would primarily look for is staff. As I said, staff really bring these programs to life. Are the staff caring and compassionate? The things that we would want to see our child treated as is what we should see in programming. Students will also mimic what they see, as we know. So, really making sure that our staff are there. Something that we can look for as well is if a facility is licensed. Just because a facility is licensed doesn't mean it's better than one that is unlicensed, but licensed facilities typically have more oversight and accountability measures that someone else has placed on them, and they will have quality assurance checks done. And these can look like things of a name to face for a student every 15 minutes. That's very common in licensing facilities, as well as do you know what your emergency role is if a child were to get injured? Or how do we handle this emergency drill? Licensed facilities are very prioritative of those types of matters. And so, again, it doesn't necessarily mean that an unlicensed facility isn't as good. It's just something that staff members are a little bit more trained on, but it is not a make or break decision. It just can add an extra level of comfort.
You've really helped detail for us how safety is goes so much farther than just sort of four walls that help protect a child from, sort of alone time or, sort of dangers outside in the community. This idea of name to face time, this idea of licensing. I think that gets to this next question. As someone who raised their children in Minnesota, obviously, there's out of school time programming. These third spaces exist in probably just about every community in the United States. And For anyone who is watching this webinar from another country, these third spaces are probably really popular in multiple countries as well. So you've done this guidebook and really zeroed in on California, which is really interesting. How would a parent or a family member or teacher or advocate from someplace else use your program guide in their context? Is it malleable that way? Like, is it something that you could take to another community?
Yes. So I chose ELAP because again, it is so expansive. California has really, really invested a lot of time and energy into creating a high quality program. And so while most of the guide talks about what ELAP offers, the legislation codes, things like that, those are things that if you're a big advocate, you can take and say, hey, California has this great policy. Can we mimic something like that? It offers a starting ground for advocates in that way. Again, specifically the evaluation part where we have those tables. Parents can ask those questions directly to staff members, have a sense of what to be looking for, and practitioners can say, oh, this is a good idea, or I haven't thought of that, or what are ways that really work for us. So while the guide and the four tenets of overarching high quality programming are meant to influence us, they shouldn't ever feel like they're constricting us because again, it is very context specific, student specific, and community specific. So what works in one community may not work in another, and that is totally okay because it is supposed to be malleable in that sense.
That's fantastic. And that also gets to this last question that I think gets to that like developmental appropriateness of after school time, out of school time programming, these third spaces for our young people. Whether it is needing, out of school time programming to be sort of high quality, enriching, and provide a kind of childcare when students are younger, whether it is to help create a sense of mastery for students who are older and perhaps maybe have been involved in something, um, uh, you know, learning more about something for many years. What are those characteristics of high quality after school programming based on grade level or age? And are there some that are through lines, whether you have a 4-year-old or a 14-year-old? And are there some that are just very developmentally specific for some of our younger people versus some of our tweens and teenagers who are in these third spaces?
Yeah, so in general, those four overarching tenets should stay the same. We want to see those staff members, the strong administration, the engagement, and having that sense of whole child development and focus. I think while they will all stay the same, I think the most important one to really focus on is engagement. The way that you engage a second grader is completely different than a seventh grader. Really being cognizant of that, I think we all remember what it was like to be little and feel like, oh, I can't participate because I'm too little or I don't understand how to do this. So making sure that when we're challenging students, it's in a way that they're able to do it with a healthy amount of struggle. We want, these really big skills to come out, such as having a strong sense of confidence, feeling capable to take on new challenges. And for that to happen, one, our students have to be engaged. Two, it has to be, like I said, that healthy challenge of do they feel comfortable taking these risks, which goes back to having staff members that they feel safe around. So these characteristics will stay the same, but we really want to tailor them to where our students are. So maybe let's say, even if we are working with seventh graders, they have maybe experienced a traumatic event in their community, being cognizant of that. Again, tying into where they are developmentally as a whole person, not just as a child or just as a student, being sensitive to what's going on in the community around them and tailoring our work to that.
Thank you so much. I want to just key in on that healthy amount of struggle because I feel like what you have provided to the out of school time community as well as advocates, and whether they are professional advocates, whether they are advocates just very much on behalf of their own children or community, um, finding high quality out of school time programming can be very stressful. It can feel very overwhelming. And for you to have taken what the research says, and distilled it in a way that puts it in the hands of all of us who want to advocate, whether we are advocating for one child or 100 or 1,000, you have created something that is going to help people struggle less and perhaps be less stressful as they look for that healthy out of school time programming. I'd love to take this opportunity to give you a few minutes to offer any closing thoughts that you've had as these questions have come up or as you have looked into the research, anything that you haven't had the chance to share. So let me turn it back to you, Jordan.
Thank you. I really want to emphasize that parents have so much more autonomy and power here than they think they have. I know from talking with my mom, because she's been very closely working with me on this project, because she is who inspired me. A lot of the time is just really feeling unsure of, can I speak to these people? Is it valid if I approach them? Yes, it is. And if staff members are not welcoming, that is a key sign. That's something that we're looking for. So, really knowing that parents, you have so much autonomy, and practitioners, these changes that you make, even if they seem little, like really focusing on learning everyone's names and asking about their weekend, things like that. Those little changes actually aren't little, they're very big and really helping these relationships grow and your students feeling comfortable, being excited to come every day and being engaged. And on this side here, I have a QR code so that you can view the whole guidebook in its entirety. You're able to look through the whole thing and see it for yourself at your own pace, as well as some contact information for me if you have any questions.
That's fantastic. And we'll be sure to post this on the Shanker Institute website as well and make sure this webinar is available on demand. What you have done for us is, again, created an incredible resource. And the timing is great. Right now, whether you are watching this at the beginning of the 2025 summer, where you are about to or have just put your own child in some out of school time programming, whether you are watching this at another time, and there is no bad time to be that advocate. And I just want to echo what Jordan said about parents being the experts at their own children, families being the expert at the children in their families. When I was a classroom teacher, I knew that when I was in community with parents, they were the experts on their children and their advocacy mattered. And you have just reinforced that for these third spaces as well. And Jordan, I really want to thank you, and it sounds like thank your mom as well for her inspiration and her advocacy, to lead to this incredible expertise, this incredible tool that you've now all given us access to. And let's keep advocating for those high quality third spaces so that our students, our children know that no matter where they are in the community, we care deeply about them and their success and their ability to thrive. Jordan, thanks so much for your time today. And for everybody who joined us, thank you very much. Look for these resources and let us know how your advocacy is going and where those high quality third spaces are that you've been finding. Thanks, everybody. Join the Shanker Institute again soon.